Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Think Small podcast. I'm your host, Denise Steinbring. Every so often, we meet a founder whose company you can't quite pin to a map. When someone recently asked today's guest where his company is located, he answered, right here, right now. Jack Oswald is the co-founder, CEO, and CTO of Isothrive, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company developing microbiome-targeted medicine for gastrointestinal disease with its lab in Manassas, Virginia. So here's the arc that makes Jack a wonderful Think Small guest. He's a Dartmouth engineer and Harvard MBA. He started Isothrive in 2013 with a microbiologist and a food scientist in a Virginia science accelerator around a single hypothesis, that the modern diet has stripped out a specific prebiotic molecule our gut bacteria depend on. They built a consumer supplement, used the revenue and the data to validate the science, and then deliberately walked the entire company out of the consumer market and into an FDA-regulated drug development process because the science led them there. 30-plus patents, a just-completed phase 2 trial, almost $20 million raised, and not a single dollar of traditional venture capital. Jack, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the Think Small podcast.
Thanks. This is really wonderful.
Yeah, that was a mouthful. Well, before we get to some of the big decisions, I really want our listeners to understand what this product actually does, because you explain it more clearly than most anyone I've heard. So you said that the bacteria in our gut don't have little battery packs. They need to be fed. So start us there. What did you and your co-founders believe modern food had taken away, and what does the product do?
Yeah, so today, since we've become a pharmaceutical company, we describe what we make as precision, targeted glycan therapeutics. What does that mean? We make bacteria food.
Okay.
and so when we eat, there's most of what we consume is there to energize our human body, but there's also a significant portion of it that is there specifically to feed the bacteria inside of our digestive tract. And if our diet doesn't have the food that some bacteria need, they can't function. They'll often stay dormant, or they'll stay alive, but they just don't do what they need for us. And our bacteria are absolutely critical to our human health. We together are human. And so what we make is a product that I discovered after we had started this process, historically was in sourdough bread, in breads that even today, when you get sourdough bread, it's still not the same, and it's still missing in the diet. Yet most of us, if not all of us, have bacteria that need this in order for us to be maximally healthy. And that's where it all started.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think traditionally people have thought that the brain is the master of the body, but it's actually the gut, right? If your gut isn't healthy, a lot of other things can go wrong.
Yeah, and in fact, there are substances that our human body needs, both for mental well-being and all kinds of different aspects of health, that are only made by the bacteria that are in our digestive tract. You can't eat your way into it directly. It's an indirect process, and it's the science is fascinating. And beyond our original premise, we've learned how to and invented ways to precisely identify conditions that people have, often chronic health issues, that can be alleviated by providing carbohydrate substances that we patent to be able to deliver them like drugs, but they have very little, if any, negative side effects.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you shared with me that most people don't actually need to understand the mechanism of action, right? They just want to feel better. So how much of this was building the science versus how much of it was simply earning enough trust in a consumer product for someone to try it?
Well, when we started, we were focused on lower GI issues, what people often call IBS-like symptoms. So gas, bloating, pooping regularly. And the product was quite good for that. And people who have those kinds of issues chronically often don't find a resolution in normal medicine and are looking for alternatives. And so building trust was fairly easy because there were no negative side effects, and people, if it worked for them, it worked really well, and they're super happy, and then they tell other people and so forth. So science in the dietary supplement world is less critical, but it also makes it really difficult to grow a business in that category.
And so when you first launched this, what was the channel by which you distributed it?
So we started direct to consumer, and it was through our website, and then ultimately Amazon. We did end up having one clinic group in the Bay Area that in San Francisco area where that took it on, and actually they still sell it today in their clinics. But it was mostly direct to consumer. And the challenge after we launched the product was that almost all marketing has gone online and was Facebook, Google, the limited number of locations where you could actually advertise. And everybody was trying to get those eyeballs. So that bid the price up for impressions, and especially in dietary supplements, it became inordinately expensive to market in those areas unless you had a celebrity involved. And that became the strategy of the day, which is you have really nice marketing and packaging and a celebrity on board to help promote your product because it breaks through. Otherwise, it's very difficult to break through the clutter.
Interesting. I bet a lot of people don't know that. Well, in 2021, when you had this prebiotic supplement that was selling, that had customers who loved it and was generating revenue, you decided to voluntarily take it through the FDA drug approval, a process that takes years, can cost millions, requires clinical trials, and can end up with rejection. Most founders with a working product would never do that. So what made you willing to sort of blow up the easier path because you believed the science demanded the harder one?
Yeah, it's a decision that was actually several years in the making. And we had launched the product in 2016, 10 and a half years ago. And in the first 6 months, so almost exactly 10 years ago, we had already had customers who were doing well with the lower GI resolution. And an inordinately high percentage also self-reported that they had this chronic heartburn, what is known as GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, for years, many for decades. And they no longer needed to take acid-reducing drugs. They could just take our product and it was resolved, and they couldn't actually trigger it anymore. And that happened so often. And because the product was never marketed for it, we knew it wasn't a placebo effect. This was a real phenomenon. And it started the process. My light bulb went off for me back then. And I said, okay, we need to understand this. And if this is as big as it could be, this may become what we focus on, and it may change the future of the company. So it took about 5 years before we had the conviction. And it was driven primarily by the fact that the marketing issues that I was talking about before, the challenges, and a specific conversation with a venture investor who invests specifically in food and dietary supplement products. We were talking about this phenomenon was continuing, and we're seeing it all the time. He said, if you really can do that, I want to invest in you, but you should go do that. You need to go and get this regulated as a drug, get new investors, revamp your team, and make that happen, because you will build a much more successful company. You'll have a lot more people, and you'll have a better outcome for all your investors. And I took that advice to heart. And although I knew it was going to be difficult, it was the right answer. But we've been preparing for it for a while. So that moment was just the right crucible to make that decision.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, how rare is it to get advice like that runs against your own short-term interest? And how did you know to trust it at that moment?
It's the fact that we were doing okay in the market. We were making money, but growing was difficult, and raising capital to grow the consumer product was difficult. And the fact that it's very rare, it almost never happens, that a dietary supplement can actually treat a disease en masse like we can, and therefore pivot to the much more rigorous process of going through the FDA for drug approval. But once you do that, you create a huge barrier to entry. You create moats and barbed wire fences and everything else such that you can own a market that nobody else has. And we were also able to patent the structure of our molecules from the beginning, which is one of the critical factors in going pharmaceutical route. You need to have what they call composition of matter, which is the actual physical structure of the molecules. And we also have the production method and methods of use. There's all this packaging you have to put around it so that they can protect it long enough to maximize the value of the investment. So we fortunately had all those parts and pieces, which gave us the license to go do it.
Okay. And you can still buy the product today, can't you? It's not off the market.
Not at this point. Based on the FDA regulations and rules, that it was grandfathered in while we're going through the initial phases of the process. There will come a point soon where we have to take it off the market because of just the nature of you can't have a drug and a not drug in the market at the same time.
I see. Well, most pharmaceutical companies raise hundreds of $1 millions before they reach phase two, but Isothrive has built a clinical stage drug candidate with 30 global patents. You've got your consumer product line, and you've got an animal health business on 19.6 million without a single dollar of traditional venture capital. So walk us through what capital discipline actually looks like when you're trying to do something that's supposed to require infinite money, and what you've learned about taking outside money. When is it the right call and when isn't it?
Well, I think it's always the right call, honestly. If you want to grow a business these days, it's very difficult to bootstrap anything. Um, Getting the right investors is always probably the more critical question, which is people that really want to work with you, understand your vision, and help you take it into the future. Um, so I just like when there's a need, there's a way, and so it was a combination of the team that I was able to attract, uh, the the ability to figure out how to do something that's for much less money and get the same outcome. And part of it's it's the fresh mind syndrome. When you come at something for the first time and you're not steeped in an industry for 20 or 30 years, the way we've always done it does not apply. And so you find the way and you find the ways to get it done. And so we were fortunate enough to hire people that came out of Vanderbilt, for example, who ran clinical trials and in the gastrointestinal world. And we were able to be able to pull this off by hard work and intelligence and just perseverance, which I think is often the story of many overnight successes that take 10 years.
Yeah. You had shared with me sort of this stuck in the middle insight, right? You were too small to clear some of the big funds minimum check sizes, and too small for the smaller play, or too big for the smaller players to keep funding as the company grew. So you really did have to do whatever it takes, but you also had investors who had actually benefited from the product or who had a close family member, right, who had amazing results.
Yeah, and I think this is an important lesson, and I try to learn these things as I go so as to not repeat them and share them with others so hopefully they can learn from it too. And that is, you can have a great idea, but funding strategy matters, right? And the way the capital markets work, especially in venture, there's funds of different sizes, and they all have different requirements. And the larger the fund, the larger the check size has to be, no matter what the deal is, just to make the numbers work, in terms of returns. And so if you can't justify a $50 million investment and that's their minimum, they might love your idea, but you're never going to get any investment from that fund. That's sort of, and the same thing with a small one. If your needs will outgrow their ability to keep up, so let's say your current stage only needs $1 million just to get to the next lily pad, and they can do that, but they're going to want to keep their pro rata share throughout the life cycle of the investment. But at some point, when it becomes $100 million round, they can't keep up. So we did find ourselves in that sort of no man's land between small and large funds. The fortunate thing is that we did have customers who either themselves or a family member was either a venture capitalist or a private equity manager. And most of them, many of them were billionaires or multi-billionaires, and they saw the benefit of this and decided that if nobody else was going to fund it, they would. So in some ways, I think of it as, I mean, the deal terms are the same. Like we didn't get any special treatment, but the impetus was not just about returns. It was like, I see the benefit of this. I understand this. This should happen. So it's almost like a combination of philanthropy mindset applied to investing.
So, for a founder who's maybe thinking about doing a capital raise, obviously you had customers who would use the products, but how do they go and find, the buyers between the small players and the big funds? Did you have an investment banker, or was it really just through personal connections? What would you tell them?
Well, in our case, it was purely through personal connections. So that, myself, other team members, happen to just have, in Silicon Valley, you have a network of people, who introduce you to other people. One of our early people was a childhood friend of Scott Cook, and he knows everybody in the Valley from Intuit, and that was an avenue to get some introductions. For example, so sometimes it's just serendipity. My recommendation is don't get stuck in the middle ground. Come up with a strategy where you can fit with what the needs of the capital markets are, because it makes your life a lot easier. And I think it's an important thing to think about. And one of the things, as I now that I've gone through this, I've always thought, when I built other businesses, I always try to be really capital efficient. But sometimes the answer is be ostentatious and justify the $50 million check. And that's the thing that, if I look back, if someone had been able to give me that advice, which is don't just do it for the budget you can do it for, figure out how to spend more to raise the capital so you have what you need. That's the one thing I probably would have done different.
Yeah. And was part of that budget allocated towards your commercialization efforts? Because what I see sometimes in the life sciences sector is founders will raise enough money to get it through the FDA, but they haven't thought about what it's going to cost to actually convince people to buy this and get payers to pay for it and to convince prescribers to prescribe it, right? And so they shortchange themselves by not raising the money to cover the full gamut, not just the clinical and reg part of it, but the commercialization piece. What's been your experience?
Yeah, well, so one of the common models these days is that for companies of our scale and what we're trying to achieve, and especially when you have a product that can touch tens of millions of people just in the US alone, hundreds of millions globally, it doesn't make sense to actually do that commercialization as a small company. It's very expensive to build the sales force, launch the multi-$100 million campaigns to market the product. And there's already plenty of companies out there that have the wherewithal, the ability to do that. And this is just another thing they can throw in the pipeline. So it's much more efficient capital-wise. And so it's more often than not that a company, once they finish phase 2, which is typically the first real proof of efficacy at a scale that you can say, okay, this is probably going to make sense in the market. That's when the larger third parties get involved. They help craft what's going to happen in the final stages of regulatory approval, because that's how they understand how to push it into the marketplace. And so that's the activity we're working on right now. We just finished our phase 2 trial. The results were outstanding. Better than most phase 2 trials ever of any type.
Awesome.
Yeah, really. For those who understand, we had highly statistically significant results on our primary endpoints and our secondary endpoints, and other things that we didn't actually throw into the mix, but we were measuring. So the results were really, really stupendous, getting a lot of attention. And so now we've begun the process of discussing with third parties to take this on to the next phase and get it to market.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So because the product does something that most people have never heard of, right? Feeding specific bacteria in the gut that the modern diets have been starving for generations, how do you build a company around something that most people can't see, can't feel immediately, and can't easily understand? And what did that teach you about the relationship between science and trust?
Well, in the end of the day, when people are suffering from some kind of health issue and they don't have another resolution, they just want it resolved. And if you can actually do that, and one of the best ways to prove that is through the FDA regulatory process. It's very rigorous. You have to measure it accurately through trusted means that anybody who looks at it who understands how to run a clinical trial and evaluate them can say, yes, I can trust the results of the data. And if it indicates that it improved the condition, then it really does improve the condition. So that's one of the most important reasons why we chose to go down this route, was that instead of having doctors previously, a customer would have success, they go tell their doctor would tell them to stop taking it because it wasn't approved by the FDA. Once you finish this process, it's unambiguously clear that when the data shows that it works, and then doctors can prescribe it, and people trust that because people still trust their doctors for the most part. And so that was one of the things that, so then people don't need to know how it works. They just need to know that it's gone through a process that lets them trust in the outcome.
Earlier, you mentioned about the celebrity endorsements, right? And the whole dietary supplement field is full of that. Oftentimes, with AI avatars serving as the celebrity, right? And I think that's created a lot of distrust in the market because, well, Kelly Clarkson is, selling these gummies to drop your blood control, and it's amazing that companies can do that without being sued for taking the likeness, right? So how did you sort of continue to build your customers' belief in that it actually worked? You didn't go down the celebrity route, and how is that even allowed to happen?
Yeah, well, so in our case, going back to budgets and what did we do with the money we brought in? Well, once we pivoted to the drug development route, as it's called, our investors actually said you can continue to sell the product, but you can't put very much, if any, money toward that consumer thing. You got to focus here. This is your future path, and we didn't disagree with that. So um, the good news is that when it works for people, and it often does, they keep taking it and they want to keep buying it. And so, and people do find it, and there's word of mouth. And so, the product continues to do well, but without a major marketing push, it would never be a breakthrough product.
Yeah, interesting. So you also have something for animal health. Talk to me a little bit about that. And does completing your phase two trial free up some time or money or resources to work on that, or is that sort of, parked in the parking lot until you can do your strategic handoff?
Yeah. So a few years back, there was a study done with the same product in poultry. So this was broiler chickens, and unfortunately, they inoculate them with antibiotic-resistant salmonella, and then they have the control group that gets regular animal feed or chicken feed, and then they put different dosings of this product in there. And when they introduced this product, those chickens were basically salmonella free, at the normal time, when they would be harvested. So huge opportunity there. Never had a chance to really push it. But one of the things we're doing simultaneously with working on finding a strategic partner is we're also raising some capital so we can expand the opportunities. Because beyond what we're doing with the one product today, what it taught us, what we learned over all these years, is a way to actually to alleviate potentially other diseases with other molecules that are similar but slightly different. Because like all what they call small molecule drugs, there's always a target and there's a lock and key, and that's how they work, right? And and in a similar way, the bacteria in your digestive tract, they can't all eat the same things. They all have different preferences. And so and we can learn that by sequencing their DNA and learning what they know how to make and what they like to eat. And we can use that information to actually target a specific outcome for each individual, depending on what their health issue is. And that's a platform we've developed. We call it Lightning and Rosetta. It's kind of fun. And and that's we're raising capital to build those out and commercialize those as well, because that's the next big phase for this technology.
Wow, that's fascinating. And so, are you yourself having to do anything to ready the market before you go and find a strategic partner to sort of hand off, all of your human products, or is that something that you're negotiating from a position of strength when your partner shows up?
Yeah, so in the drug world, the pre-positioning is not with consumers. It's actually with the research professionals, doctors who do research,
Mhm.
and getting them up to speed. Many of them already involved, have been advisors to us for many years, and making sure they see the data, they understand it, and so forth, because it's the larger pharmaceutical companies, the FDA, and other regulatory bodies that make recommendations on treatment go to what they call the key opinion leaders, or KOLs. And so that's what we've been doing now. So it's a staged approach,
Mhm.
and ultimately the consumer part comes much later.
Okay.
And I would say the good news about that is that the product that we just tested was for people who have what we call chronic heartburn or gastroesophageal reflux disease, or what they call non-erosive reflux disease. That's becomes nerd, which is fun, and and people who have some benefit from taking one of the acid reducing drugs like a Prilosec or an Nexium, but still suffer many days a week. And that group has no product in the market that can help them beyond that, except this is coming. Mm-hmm. And that's the excitement about where we are right now, is that this is an opportunity. People have been wanting this for years. There hasn't been anything out there, and there's nothing else coming. So we have a bunch of relief coming.
Yeah, well, that's a great competitive position to be in if nothing else is coming also. So for consumers, how far out do you think this will be before it becomes available for doctors to prescribe?
At least 3, could be as much as 5 years.
3 to 5 years. Wow. It's a long development cycle.
Yes.
Well, you co-founded Isothrive 12 years ago with this hypothesis about what modern food has taken from our gut health. And for a founder maybe who's in the middle of something that requires more patience than they expected and more conviction than they thought that they had, what's the one thing that you know now that you wish someone had told you before you started?
Well, it's one thing that I learned along the way, and that was this became very meaningful because once I really understood, because I don't have this condition, this chronic heartburn problem. But once I understood it from having talked to people about it and realized how debilitating it can be because it's day after day after day. Mm-hmm. And then when they get relief, they feel like they've gotten their life back. Yeah. And so that somewhere already a while back became the real motivator, not building a successful company, not building, not making a lot of money. Although if you help all those people, all of those things will come along, as part of the process. And then when it's on the days when it's really difficult and when you look like you're going to run out of money, or whatever, or some surprise happens that you didn't expect, it's that motivation that really keeps me going. But also at the same time, it's something I continually have reminded the team, both my executives and the entire company. I said, how often in any given lifetime does anyone get a chance to make this much impact on this many people's lives? Just realize what a gift you've been given to actually be part of that. That's an amazing thing we get to do.
Yeah, it's your legacy, right? It's the impact that, or the thumbprint that you had on the world. And
it's not so much that, like, I don't want credit for it. I'm happy to be completely anonymous, but in my soul, it feels like I could not let this go, because this is something that needed to actually move forward and see the light of day.
Yeah. And I think one of the pearls that you just shared was there's lots of times that young companies almost ran out of money, right? And you have to realize that this is not new. This is a phenomena about where you are in your growth trajectory, right? And it happens to lots of small companies, but you have to keep going and finding a way through.
Yeah, there was a podcast I listened to a bunch of years ago. It was actually the founder and CEO of Shopify. Oh. And he was talking about, at more than one occasion, they were going to run out of money. They didn't have enough money. They were raising money. And the team said, should we pull back and conserve? And he said, absolutely not. We have to assume that what we're doing is the right thing, that we're making a difference, and that we will succeed at raising the money. Anything we do to slow that down will increase, basically put us in the spiral of death. Mm-hmm. And I took that to heart, and that's exactly how I've run this company. And I think it's actually absolutely another pearl of wisdom that I learned along the way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Jack, this has been a wonderful conversation. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you or about Isothrive or some of the great work that you're doing?
So the website's the best, isothrive.com. And it is a lot of information about what we're working on now and the other diseases that are not just of the GI tract, but some of them are things like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, beyond things like GERD and ulcerative colitis. Yeah, there are many other things that we have been working on and we want to continue to make progress on.
Well, that's wonderful. And to our Think Small listeners, if Jack's story reminded you that the harder path is sometimes the only honest one, share this episode with a founder who's standing at that fork right now. We'll see you all next time, and thank you so much for sharing all of your story and all the great work you're doing there at Isothrive, Jack. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks. This is really fun.
Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?